These are the richest black women in Paris, and their wealth only gets crazier as we move. We're talking about a woman who started a beauty brand with 1,500 euros and ended up selling it to Sephora while appearing on French Shark Tank, a woman who built Africa's most valuable oil and telecom empire only to have 3 governments simultaneously try to freeze her assets, and a woman that convinced LVMH to make her the first black woman to lead one of its brands. Let's get into it. Number 8. Wendy Renard. The most decorated player in women's football history. Wendy Renard is from Martinique. She moved to mainland France at 16 with a singular focus, joined Olympique Lyonnais Youth Academy, and proceeded to become arguably the most decorated player in the history of women's professional football. 14 Division 1. Feminine titles. Multiple UEFA Women's Champions League trophies. Captain of both club and country for extended periods of time across a career that has spanned nearly 2 decades at the highest level of the sport. Her estimated net worth sits between 2 and 4 million euros, built on a club salary approaching $392,000 annually from Olympique Lyonnais, with Adidas and MasterCard sponsorship contracts layered on top, positioning her comfortably within the small group of female athletes in France who have converted sustained elite performance into a financially independent platform. But here is the detail that makes Renard genuinely interesting beyond the trophy cabinet. In 2023, she didn't just retire from the French national team. She announced her decision to step back ahead of the Women's World Cup, citing irreconcilable differences with the team's management structure, and then watched as other senior players made similar decisions in solidarity, triggering a crisis significant enough that the national coaching staff had to be substantively restructured. She didn't slip away quietly. She used her financial independence and her institutional status to publicly challenge the system that had made her career, knowing the fallout would be messy and sustained, because she had decided that the status quo was not worth protecting with her silence. That is a very specific kind of leverage, and exercising it requires both the financial security to absorb the backlash and the willingness to prioritize structural improvement over personal comfort. Her Paris presence runs through the national team's operations in the capital, the city's sports media landscape, where she remains one of the most recognized athletic figures in French women's sports, and the broader conversation about equitable investment in women's athletics that she has consistently elevated through both her performance and her decisions off the pitch. In a city that has historically cared more about what women look like in sport than what they accomplish, Renard has made accomplishment the only relevant metric. Number 7. Cindy Bruna. The first black model to walk, exclusively for Calvin Klein. Cindy Bruna was discovered on a beach in Saint Raphael at 16 by a modeling scout. She moved to Paris, signed with Karen Models, and became the first black model to walk exclusively for Calvin Klein, which sounds like a single milestone but was actually a structural shift in what high fashion casting considered acceptable for an exclusive contract at that level. From that platform, she built a career that now encompasses Chanel, Prada, Balmain, and L'Oreal, with an estimated net worth between 3 and 5 million euros derived from runway fees, campaign contracts, and a digital presence that her predecessors in the modeling industry never had access to. Her Instagram sponsorship content earns between $150,000 and $205,000 annually, a revenue stream built on authentic fashion credibility rather than manufactured lifestyle content, which is the distinction that separates sustainable digital income from the kind that evaporates when the brand partnerships dry up. Born to a Congolese mother and Italian father, Bruna occupies a particular position in the Paris fashion world. She is both a primary beneficiary of its luxury infrastructure and a persistent public critic of the practices that operate just beneath the polished surface of its campaigns. She has spoken specifically and repeatedly about the experiences of black models behind the scenes, the hairstylists who arrive on set without the training or products to handle textured hair, the makeup artists whose professional kits stop at a skin tone range that excludes large portions of the actual human population, the structural carelessness that persists in institutions whose public-facing messaging has become fluent in the language of diversity. Her advocacy isn't performed in press cycles and then quietly dropped. It's embedded in the same career that gives her access to the runways she's critiquing, which makes it considerably more credible and considerably more uncomfortable for the houses she works with. Because she is not a critic observing from outside, She is a partner operating from inside, and both of those things remain true at the same time. The Calvin Klein exclusivity was the door. What Bruna built after it reflects a specific understanding of how to convert a modeling career into a durable financial position rather than a temporary income stream. Number 6. Sonia Rolland, Miss France 2000. Sonia Rolland's life contains more narrative material than most people's entire family histories. Born in Kigali, Rwanda, to a Tutsi mother and French father, she fled the 1994 genocide with her family and eventually settled in Burgundy. In 1999, she won the Miss Burgundy title. In 2000, she became the first woman of African descent to be crowned Miss France, and subsequently placed in the top 10 at Miss Universe before pivoting to acting, directing, and documentary filmmaking. Her estimated net worth sits between 3 and 5 million euros, built across her Miss France endorsements, including a long-term contract as the face of L'Oréal's Mecca skincare brand, followed by decades of work as a producer and director, creating content for French television networks. She established her own production assets rather than remaining purely on the performance side of the industry, which is the move that shifts income from episodic to structural. The complications are significant and worth understanding fully. In 2021, French investigators questioned Rolland about a Parisian apartment that was gifted to her in 2003 by the late Gabonese president Omar Bongo, an asset that appeared in the broader Biens Mal Acquis investigation, examining how post-colonial political wealth moved through French real estate markets. She cooperated fully, stated she had accepted the gift in naivety at a young age, and denied any wrongdoing. Separately, her past relationship with Christophe Rocancourt, a con man who successfully impersonated a member of the Rockefeller family to scam wealthy Parisians, attracted sustained media attention before the split in 2008. She runs Maisha Africa, a charity supporting orphans in Rwanda. She is, in summary, one of the most genuinely layered people on this list, and the layers don't resolve neatly. Number 5. Aya Nakamura, the most streamed French female artist on Earth. In 2022, Aya Nakamura was the most streamed French female artist in the world. Not most streamed in France, in the world, across every platform, in every market. Her catalog had accumulated billions of streams. Her 3-night run at the Stade de France generated over 3 million euros, and her partnerships include a global brand ambassador role for Lancôme, which is owned by L'Oréal, the most powerful cosmetics conglomerate in Europe, alongside active partnerships with Cartier and Nike. Her net worth is estimated in the multi-million euro range, a figure that is almost certainly already conservative given the trajectory of her streaming royalties and brand deal escalators. She was born Aya Koko Danyoko in Bamako, Mali, immigrated to France with her family, and grew up in La Courneuve, a northern suburb of Paris that France's cultural and political establishment has historically treated as peripheral, both geographically and symbolically. She began releasing music independently on social media, building an audience without industry infrastructure, without label support, without the gatekeeping that the French music establishment applies with considerable force to artists it doesn't immediately understand. The sound she developed, blending Afrobeat, dancehall, and R&B with French slang and West African dialects, is the combination that produces her streaming numbers, and also the combination that makes certain conservative voices in France visibly uncomfortable about what her global success represents. The Paris Olympics debate became the public flashpoint. When it emerged that Nakamura might perform a version of an Edith Piaf song at the opening ceremony, the political response from the French right was immediate, vocal, and disproportionate to the actual question of who performs at a sporting event. What was being debated, with a directness that some participants didn't bother concealing, was something considerably larger. Who gets to be the face of French culture when the cameras point at France and the whole world is watching? Lancôme, Cartier, and the luxury institutions that have built significant commercial partnerships with Nakamura apparently reached their own conclusions about that question. Their money went where their messaging follows. Number 4. Kelly Massol, a beauty brand that changed the French market. Kelly Massol's origin story is the kind that French TV producers would struggle to invent because it contains too many improbable details simultaneously. She was abandoned as an infant, raised by her grandmother Dorothée Ravel-Vingot in a fifth-floor maid's room in Paris's 9th arrondissement. That grandmother, the woman who raised her in a small apartment while Kelly built her brand, was a mathematics professor at the Sorbonne and the first black woman ever to teach there. The context of what Massol built is inseparable from where she built it and who she was building it around. She started Les Secrets de Loli in 2009 with €1,500 and a kitchen. Before that, she was working as a telephone operator for the French social security system while running an online forum called Boucles et Coton, where she shared information about natural hair care for curly and coily textures, a category that the French beauty market had systematically underserved for the entire time it had been operating. She began formulating her own shampoos and conditioners at home because the existing products didn't work well enough, and kept improving them until the formulations were good enough to sell commercially. The brand's trajectory since then is one of the more remarkable in French cosmetics. Revenue grew from €17 million in 2022 to €25 million in 2023 to €35 million in 2024, distributed through Sephora and thousands of French pharmacies. In 2022, she opened the company's capital to Quilvest Capital Partners while retaining majority ownership. Her personal net worth is estimated between 10 and 20 million euros, with the enterprise value of the brand reaching approximately 70 million euros. She now appears on Qui veut être mon associé, the French edition of Shark Tank, as an investor, deploying 2.3 million euros in her first season, which is the kind of full circle that happens when someone who built something genuinely transformative gets the platform that reflects what they actually built. Her public persona is direct and frequently combative, particularly with beauty influencers who she believes misrepresent her brand or her business model. In March 2025, she publicly responded to industry criticism with a candor that most founders at her level carefully avoid, which either reflects a specific confidence or a specific refusal to perform the humility that French corporate culture tends to expect. Number 3. Pascaline Bongo Ondimba, a power broker with a massive Paris property portfolio. Pascaline Bongo Ondimba is the eldest daughter of Omar Bongo, who ruled Gabon for over 4 decades and built one of post-colonial Africa's most significant dynastic fortunes. Pascaline herself occupied senior positions in the Gabonese government, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Director of the Presidential Cabinet, and used that institutional access to become the most consequential intermediary between French multinational corporations and the Gabonese state for a significant stretch of the country's recent history. Her wealth is rooted in dynastic inheritance rather than independent enterprise, and that distinction is relevant because it shapes both the nature of the assets and the legal vulnerabilities around them. The Bongo family's French real estate portfolio has been estimated at a minimum of 85 million euros by judicial investigators, with Pascaline directly connected to multiple high-value properties in Paris's most exclusive residential districts. Her lifestyle has been defined by the specific texture of Francafrique, the dense decades-long web of financial, political, and social relationships between the French establishment and African political elites, including access to elite private schools, designer shopping on the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, and relationships with French political figures that predated and outlasted the formal government positions. In 2024, she faced trial in Paris on corruption charges, with prosecutors accusing her of accepting promises of public contract shares from French engineering firm Aegis-Route in exchange for political influence over Gabonese state procurement. This case represents one of the most direct legal confrontations between the French judicial system and the post-colonial wealth structures that have defined Franco-African economic relationships for generations. And Pascaline, as the most senior surviving member of the Bongo political family, finds herself at its center. The proceedings are ongoing. Number 2. Isabel dos Santos. Why? Africa's first female billionaire. Isabel dos Santos built what was, at its peak, a $2.4 billion fortune spanning telecommunications, banking, retail, and energy assets across Angola and Portugal, making her Africa's first female billionaire by a margin that felt unambiguous at the time. She is the eldest daughter of Angola's former president, José Eduardo dos Santos, who governed the country for 38 years, and she has spent years in public and legal settings disputing whether that relationship explains her wealth or simply coincides with it. The distinction matters enormously to the legal proceedings and considerably less to the business history. Her strategy was structurally sophisticated, regardless of how the initial capital was sourced. She positioned herself as the indispensable local partner for international companies seeking access to Angola's resource economy, a role that required genuine business acumen to execute even when the access itself was politically facilitated, and converted that positioning into direct equity stakes in European firms, including Galp Energia and multiple Portuguese banking institutions. She acquired a controlling stake in De Grisogano, the Swiss luxury jeweler, through a structure that prosecutors later alleged funneled Angolan state funds. She managed her international assets through a network of over 400 companies spanning 41 countries, an architecture sophisticated enough that the Luanda Leaks investigation in 2020, which exposed many of the holding structures, involved over 715,000 documents and required a consortium of 120 journalists across 20 countries to analyze. Her estimated net worth is around $1.4 billion at current accounting, a figure representing what remains after asset freezes in Angola, Portugal, and the Netherlands, and after a London court ordered a freeze on up to $733 million in additional assets in December 2023. An Interpol Red Notice was issued in 2023. Multiple governments are simultaneously pursuing legal recovery claims against her holdings. And through all of it, Isabel dos Santos has maintained an active social media presence, posting about business strategy, entrepreneurship, personal philosophy, and the occasional luxury travel snapshot, which is either extraordinary composure under sustained international legal pressure or a calculated performance of unbothered status designed to signal to the market that the situation is less terminal than the headlines suggest. Possibly both. Her Paris chapter runs through the European private banking networks she used to architect and manage her international holdings, through the social infrastructure of elite Parisian finance that provided institutional credibility, her Angolan assets required for European market access, and through the broader question that her entire case surfaces about how post-colonial wealth was accumulated, through which international structures it was stored, and what the Western financial system's role was in enabling the process before becoming the mechanism of its unraveling. Number 1. Rihanna, LVMH, made her the first black woman to lead a luxury house. Rihanna's $1.4 billion net worth is not primarily a music story. It is a business architecture story, specifically the story of what happens when someone understands the difference between being a face attached to a product and being an owner of the company that makes it, and negotiates accordingly from the very beginning. The architecture starts with a single structural decision. Instead of licensing her name to an existing beauty conglomerate for a royalty percentage and a promotional commitment, she partnered directly with LVMH to build Fenty Beauty as a co-owned joint venture with meaningful equity on her side of the table. LVMH had never structured that kind of deal for a musician. They had never structured it for a black woman. Rihanna negotiated both firsts simultaneously, in the same conversation, with the most powerful luxury group in the world on the other side of the table. The result is a brand she co-owns rather than endorses, and in the beauty industry, at LVMH's scale, that distinction is worth hundreds of millions of dollars over a career. Fenty Beauty launched in 2017 with 40 foundation shades. The choice wasn't cosmetic, it was a deliberate market entry strategy targeting the gap that every other major beauty brand had failed to close over decades of industry history. The systematic underrepresentation of darker skin tones and foundation ranges had been a documented problem, discussed at conferences, acknowledged in mission statements, and basically unchanged in product ranges. Fenty resolved it at launch and generated $100 million in sales within its first 40 days. The companies that had spent years discussing the gap spent the months after Fenty's launch scrambling to expand their shade ranges, which is the economic version of proving the point more effectively than any advocacy campaign could have. The brand doubled its revenue in 2022. Fenty Skin extended the franchise into skincare in 2020. Fenty Maison, the fashion line that made her the first black woman to lead a luxury house under the LVMH umbrella, was paused in 2021, a setback she has acknowledged directly, while the cosmetics and skincare divisions continued growing through the same period. The Paris infrastructure was central to how all of it scaled. LVMH's Parisian manufacturing facilities, its global distribution networks built across decades and dozens of markets, the runway credibility of being positioned inside the same conglomerate as Louis Vuitton and Dior, and the institutional legitimacy that positioning provides to every Fenty product that enters a new market and needs a reason for premium retail to take it seriously. Most brands take decades to build that infrastructure. Rihanna accessed it on launch day because she negotiated ownership rather than endorsement. She was born in Barbados. She bypassed the American fashion and beauty networks that most artists treat as the primary path to commercial credibility. She went directly to Paris and to the most powerful luxury ecosystem in the world, and the terms she secured reflect either extraordinary negotiating leverage or extraordinary business vision. And the answer is probably that both were present in the same room. And that's a wrap on the 8 wealthiest black women from Paris. Which one of these beauties impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments. And for more such interesting peeks into how black wealth is rolling across the globe, subscribe to Black Status.